Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. I want to do a really briefish sort of idea about a character sketch, how to start them, what they are. I'm asking that you submit one of these and a kind of general plot slash narrative outline here in a few weeks. So I wanted to do a talk on what is a character sketch, how to kind of start them. Um, what goes into a character, that sort of thing. And if my brain is limber enough right now this morning to kind of discuss perhaps some examples from film or books of characters that work, some that don't work, and I'll use those as models. So remember, when you're doing characters, right? It's not just that the character has a name. Um, it's not just that the character is from some country, right? There are more subtle things in terms of the psychology of your characters that you really want to focus on. And as I said in the discussion the other day about the characters, like in the fiction outline that I discussed, that idea of hamartia, right? That the characters have to have flaws. And usually those flaws work in kind of oppositional force against what the characters want or against what the characters do. Okay? So the flaw has to kind of lead to a strength, or the strength of the character has to lead to a flaw. Okay? This is how we humanize the characters, and this is how we basically get our readers to empathize with our characters. Okay, so what you want to do is kind of sketch out a list of physical traits of that person in your mind, but also psychological. Okay, and psychological, this can go back to their backstory, how they were raised, who their parents were. Were they raised in a strict religious background? Were they raised by a bunch of drug using hippies? That sort of thing. Because those causal effects, okay, from childhood to adulthood, X here means childhood. Those causal effects, right? The things that affected them as a kid are going to necessarily have to show up as adults. And this is why, for example, I don't recommend that you use kids as your point of view characters, as your viewpoint characters. If you're doing young adult literature, YA lit, then I guess it's kind of okay. But children are not all that interesting as characters. I'm sorry, no offense, right? But adults are just more psychologically complex, and therefore they're more interesting as characters in fiction. Okay, so I'm just gonna, top of my head, I have not actually done any notes for this. I'm just doing off the top of my head. Let's create a character. Okay. Let's call her. Let's just go generic. Mary. Mary Griffin. Okay. Now, if you wanted to, you can start to even play with names. Now, names are important. Some stories that we're going to read, the characters aren't named, and we'll see why. Okay, names are actually kind of interesting because we don't really choose them. I guess unless you're a recording artist, right, where you choose your stage name or something. But names in fiction can have implications. So here, a griffin, right? It's a mythological beast. We could do the kind of normal spelling, or we could modify it And then we get some of the resonance, some of the reference to the mythological character. Mary is a name that is both common and also referential. You cannot, in Western literature, name a character Mary without having some reference to, potentially at least, to the biblical Mary. Now here, for example, I mean, you even get the mother of Jesus, or you get Mary Magdalene, okay? And there, you can kind of play on those tensions if you wanted, right? You can play on those. There's all kinds of things. So once even just sketching a character's name, okay, allows you to mentally picture, right, some of their characteristics, some of their personality. So you get your name, where's that character from? Let's say she's from Nassau. All right. Let's say that she is pretty. I'm just doing physical characters. Now, pretty, I mean, that's very subjective, okay? But you see that what you're doing is you're trying to get a mental picture of this person. Because if you're sitting down and trying to write out a story of what Mary's doing day by day or whatever, right? If you don't have a good picture in your mind, who she is, what she looks like, how she reacts to things, you're going to kind of throw her out in the world and she's not going to be able to do anything, okay? So let's say she's pretty, but she doesn't like to exercise and prefers eating peas and rice, and ice cream. And so she's a tad overweight. I'm not judging that. I'm just saying these are physical characteristics of this character. She doesn't like to exercise. Okay. We can get into things like hairstyle, right? What's her hair look like? Let's just say that she cuts it very short. Okay. So I have kind of a close cropped haircut. Okay. Okay. So now let's get into some psychological traits. What does she do? Is she a UB student? Okay, let's make her a UB student. What does she study? Let's say she studies biology, but she's really interested in creative writing. Because, let's be honest, who isn't? Now, what else? Why does she want to study biology? Okay, now you see, once we get into these why questions, then we start to explore the psychological elements, right? Maybe her grandfather was a fisherman, right? And so he would bring home fish and all kinds of things from the sea that were very foreign to her as a child. And so that created a kind of fascination, okay? So she has a fascination with the natural world. Okay, let's change this then to make it more specific. She's a marine biologist, okay? Now, you see that once we get this in place, we can start thinking of themes or metaphors or symbols, because what we're looking for are possible situations or settings that we can put her in, okay, where we challenge the character. Okay. And notice, we don't really know much about her yet at all because we haven't put her into the world. Okay. But marine biology is going to imply what? The ocean. Now, if we think of the ocean not just as a body of water, but rather as a metaphor or a symbol, right? The ocean could be the unknown, because if you think about it, it's deep. We know more about the moon than we do about the bottom of the ocean, for example, okay? It's very hard to get down there, very hard to see. We really don't know all that much as to what goes on down there. We can only make guesses. There is a really good book called The Deep. It's a book of photographs from the bottom of the ocean. It is unbelievable. Anyway, okay, so maybe we think of this. We think of at some point in the story, okay, she's going to be on a boat doing some kind of research for school or whatever, and something has to happen. Now maybe she's knocked overboard. Maybe there's a storm. Maybe we don't know yet. Okay, but what we're trying to do. Let's do sequential. What we're trying to do is get a mental picture of, stuff that might happen in the story. So maybe D here is this boat scene. So we're just kind of mentally sketching out how are we going to get her to the boat. Now, when you start writing your stories, okay, the thing that I mentioned this the other day. Here, let me make it more legible. What I want you to try to think of is to start the stories in what's called medias res. This is a convention. If memory serves me, it's a convention from the Latin poet Horace, and it literally just means the middle of things. Res means thing. Medias, you can see. So what you want to do is get your characters out into the world. Never have the characters wake up at the beginning of a story. Never, 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 never. Okay? That is the worst opening to a story possible. Do not have them wake up from a coma. Do not have them pass out. Okay? Those are just lazy storytelling conventions. Okay? So you want to open the story with them out in the world doing something. Okay? So let's say Mary is, let's say, well, if we start her off on campus, okay, that's possible. Are there any other places, we can start her off? Home? That's a little boring. Campus is a little bit better. There's more, it's less comfortable. And I want you to think about this as you're building the scenes, okay? You want to just kind of nudge the characters ever so slowly into less comfortable environments. If we start her off at home, okay, home is usually a safe place. And now I know that home is also a place of strife and families fighting and mom and dad yelling and sisters and brothers fighting. I get that, okay? But home also has these implications of safety and all of that. So starting off on campus, maybe, you can start off at the mall, KFC, who cares, right? So let's try this. Let's start her off at KFC, okay? She's buying lunch, she's standing in line, and I'm just sketching out a scene in my mind. Okay, I don't know where it's going. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if I'm going to even keep this scene. That's something that all writers have to balance. They have to write stuff and sketch stuff and take notes and be ready. You might write 10 pages of a whole story and then think, oh, it's garbage. I can't use it. Now, that doesn't mean it's garbage that you should throw away. It just means it's garbage you should save for later. Okay? Never delete your writing, just save it for later. You might be able to use that somewhere else in another story or for another purpose. Okay, let's say she's standing in line and there's a rude man who's kind of, saying inappropriate things to her. Okay? And he's trying to flirt or just be rude or whatever. And notice here, it's kind of cliche, but what I'm trying to do, I instantly start thinking of agam. I instantly start thinking of tension. Okay? How can I start slowly building tension? Okay? Because if she's just standing in line and buys food and eats it and goes to class and gets bored and you see that there's nothing happening. It's all kind of flat. Okay? But let's say she's standing in line. This guy says something, inappropriate or lewd to her. Now, what does she do? She has two choices, basically. This is what I want you guys to think of. Pushing your characters to moments in the story where they have two choices, sometimes three or whatever, but think of it in terms of duality. She can confront him, or she can just bite her lip and remain silent. Now notice this. This is super important. These crossroads, okay, these represent things in the story, okay, that the characters cannot take back. Okay, so if she makes this choice or this choice or this choice or this choice, right? She could do this thing or that thing. She chooses this and it goes forward. She can't take it back, right? So think about it like this. If she just ignores him, okay, that's fine. I mean, probably I think, a lot of women just choose to ignore it, unfortunately. So she can, you see that there's no consequence of that. If she ignores it, like let's say she takes alpha here, there's going to have to be some result from that still leads to this kind of crossroads action. So like, let's say she ignores it. So I'm just trying to think, tension. Let's say he said something rude, she ignores it, and she goes back to campus, and somebody, sees her, a friend or a classmate or whatever, and they say something just very simple, like, hi, Mary. And then she freaks out on them, like, because all this psychological tension is really working on her, okay? It's making her very uncomfortable. So she doesn't confront this guy, but she kind of blows up at somebody who clearly doesn't deserve it, okay? So she blows up, and she can't take that back, okay? Now, in normal life, right, most of us act in such a way that we can usually take back or apologize or make amends for mistakes or things we do, okay? In stories, you want to try to minimize that to a degree because you want your characters to be doing things that have consequence in the story. Stories are like real life, okay, but they are actually formulaic to a large degree, okay? So she blows up at her friend or a classmate. Let's call him Jay. All right. So she blows up at Jay. You men are all the same, blah, 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 blah. And she just storms off, okay, and leaves Jay sitting there wondering, what did I do, okay? So she goes to class and she feels bad. Okay. So now she has to make a choice. Does she not apologize or does she apologize? Okay. Let's make her apologize because that, now we have tension. I mean, apologizing, right, and having to admit that you're wrong about something, that creates tension, doesn't it? Okay. So she apologizes and she says, okay, look, I'll buy you lunch. I'm sorry. So they go to lunch and, they strike up a conversation about, let's say, biology. They're chatting. What do you study? What do you do? And so she starts telling him maybe a couple of stories. Now you see, now I'm getting backstory. I'm referencing the grandfather. I'm trying to get exposition into this story. And he, let's say, asks her out on a date. Okay, so she can say no or she can say yes. So she says yes. Now she can't take this back. And then she goes on this date with Jay and he murders her. I'm kidding. Don't ever do that in a story. Murder is fine. But you see that in this sense, I actually see this quite often. We don't know anything about this character yet. So it'd be very strange if out of nowhere he just like kidnapped her and murdered her. You have no idea how many times I actually see that kind of uh, uh, story development in first or second drafts. Okay, so she goes on a date. Now, let's say that she has fun. Okay, and he says, "Hey, I live by myself. Do you want to stop by for a drink?" Okay, and she says, "Well, I don't really drink." And he says, "Well, we can have soda." All right. Now, we can go. She says no. She says yes. Okay, she says yes. She goes there. Let's say things happen. You're adults, you can figure it out. And she gets pregnant. Okay, now you see that all of this chain of events. Now, if she gets pregnant from a one night stand, I don't know. That seems a little cliche to me. But I'm just trying to show you that as you're sketching out these scenes, right, you want to always keep in mind, right, who the character is. You know, we get the biology reference, we get the grandfather, right? Maybe she's a bit timid. Okay, so she's afraid to confront this guy, but maybe you could ramp it up here where she says, "You know what? I'm not going to be timid anymore." And so we're now changing the story. Okay? He invites her to his place and she says, "I'm not going to be timid anymore. I'm not going to let men dictate to me what I do." And she is the one who initiates the situation with Jay. Okay, so she's trying to be assertive. So her timidity, you see, leads to her being assertive. And then if she gets pregnant, you know, notice this, that her trying to overcome her timidity has a consequence. Okay, so you see that there is a kind of causal relationship here. Now, in real life, this doesn't always happen. I mean, in real life, there are just chance things that go on, random stuff. But in a story, you kind of want to have this causal chain. Okay. Otherwise, the story feels a bit disjointed. It feels a bit disjuncted, and the readers are going to wonder, well, you know, why is this element in here? Why is this part here in the story? Okay. So now, I mean, this is basically just one scene, even though it takes place in different situations. But notice this. Once she becomes pregnant, right, now we have a whole new kind of point. We have a whole new plot, right? Now she has to decide, well, what am I going to do? Let's say that she's about 21, okay? She's a college student, so if she has a child, probably she's going to have to drop out of school. And she promised her grandfather that she would get a college degree because he was so proud of her when he died 2.5 years ago for going to college. She was the first one in the entire family. So you see, now we have this contradiction. Okay, we have this tension, this force, right? Let's say she's a devout Christian, and so she thinks abortion is wrong. Okay? She thinks abortion is wrong, but she made this promise to her grandfather, right? So, does she keep the child, or does she keep the promise? And this, you see, now we've got a lot of tension. And this can drive the next part of the story, okay? So, you know, maybe she, you know, the big choice now, if it's an abortion story, is does she, you know, choose to terminate the pregnancy or not? And that leads to the ending, right? So you see that we're constantly trying to just nudge the story toward moments of tension, moments of crisis, and especially these crossroads moments that the characters cannot take back. Okay? Now, that's just a really brief kind of way of approaching a character sketch. So what I do recommend you do, for especially for your stories, but for this assignment too, is to just take a page, and you're going to print this out or write it out, and just write out a big list of attributes of that character. It could be as innocuous that she's left-handed, that she has a slightly lazy eye, which means she probably wears glasses. Now you see that what these do, these little details, they just give you things, little nice details that you can throw into the story. As she's talking to Jay, because she's nervous, she doesn't want him to see his or her lazy eye and think she's unattractive. With her left hand, she's constantly fidgeting with her glasses. He responds and says, what's wrong with your glasses? What's wrong with your eye? Are you okay? Showing sympathy, showing concern. But you see that it has this kind of feedback. Okay, her characteristics have feedback from the world, right? She's fidgeting with her glasses because she's nervous. He says something. She says something. He says, "Oh well, lazy eye. You wouldn't believe the kinds of things I had to go through in childhood. I was born without teeth." "Oh, really?" She says. "Born without teeth? That's a biological oddity." "You bet it is," right? But you see that it creates a more natural kind of feedback between your main character and other characters or the setting, right? Like if she really needed her glasses to see, and if she's out on that boat on the ocean, right? Let's go back to that. The kind of cliche would be to have her lose her glasses into the ocean. Okay. Now, if we think about that metaphorically, right? She loses her glasses. Her ability to see, right, descends into darkness as she is left up here in the light, right, to see or to make choices, right? Like, am I going to terminate this pregnancy? What am I going to do? What am I going to do with my life? Who am I? So you see that here we have this kind of nice potential for a kind of thematic or symbolic action. And so these things like themes and symbols and all of this, they can very often accidentally happen in your story as you're writing them. Okay. So these are just things that you can think about. Okay. So maybe she, for example, while she's out on the ocean, they collect a fish. Let's say that they're doing, they're studying sharks. Okay, because sharks give live birth. So they pull a shark in. Okay. So they pull a shark in, and it's a pregnant female shark, and her professor or the researcher, whatever, cuts it open. And all of a sudden, all over the boat, the deck, are all of these little squirming baby sharks. And she, once again, right, consequence, she then realizes, life is very precious, or it makes her so sick. It makes her think of something growing inside of her, right, like these little baby sharks. And it makes her sick, and then she decides, yes, I'm going to terminate the pregnancy. Or she realizes, wow, even a primitive, barely evolved creature of 250 million years, right, still, she thinks of the cycles of life or whatever, right? She decides no. So you see that constantly you're just trying to nudge the story to scenes where the characters make choices that then have effects, okay? Choices they cannot take back. She cannot take back seeing this. She cannot take back losing her glasses. She cannot take back, being aggressive with Jay and then accidentally getting pregnant. So you see, even accidents have to have a kind of causal reference or causal chain that links the character back to the story. So this is a very kind of rough sketch as to how to build a character and how to kind of get them into the story. Because once you know the character a little better, you can decide, what do they want? What do they desire? So her, for example, remember back here, oops, that was not what I wanted to do. Remember back here where this is what she wanted, right? She made this promise to her grandfather. So that's the thing she wants. That's her focus, right? So if that's the thing that she wants, how is the plot going to push against that, right? Maybe she gets some institutional pressures from classmates or her family for, going into the sciences. I don't know. There's all kinds of different things you can put in her way. But when you think of what the character wants, the plot is the thing pushing back against that. So part of the plot here is that she gets pregnant. Now you notice that that creates tension. What are the possible resolutions? She has the child. She doesn't have the child. There's really no third option. I guess she can have it and put it up for adoption. But that doesn't really fit the arc of this story, you see. So we want to kind of try to keep these, kind of like a yes-no dynamic, okay? So you see that we're just constantly putting the character in some kind of harm's way. And that helps us to figure out what the plot is going to be in this story. Is it going to be a tragedy? Is it going to be a love plot? Maybe she thinks she wants this promise or this degree, but she realizes, she falls in love with Jay. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay, that's for you to figure out. Sometimes you're going to write a scene, like I said, and figure out, maybe you go in this direction. She has the kid, and then you realize, well, that's not very good. I don't like that one. So you think, okay, she doesn't have the kid. More tension, okay? And you write that out, and then you realize, oh man, none of this is working. I have to start a new story. So you see that when you start that new story, you're not throwing all of this away. All of this map, all of that writing is still there. So you just put it away for a while and come back in a month with fresh eyes. I guarantee you, if you do this more and more, you'll have a whole pile of stories just sitting there waiting for you to come back to. And when you do that, if you give yourself 1 to 6 months before you revisit something, you'll come back and reread it and you'll start to notice things in it that are really wrong, but also things that are working. Okay, so this is also just about building a kind of repertoire or an oeuvre that you can use to draw upon when you get stuck in a future story. So you just go back to another story or a poem or whatever and work on that. So that's a kind of just generalized sketch of, what I'm kind of looking for that assignment. But that's how I'd like you to approach all of your stories until you can build these characters in your heads. Right? I think it's a really good idea if you're not that familiar with it or familiar with the character, to just sit down and write out attributes, physical and psychological attributes. What do they want? What do they do? Right? Not just that she's smart, but maybe she's overly ambitious. Maybe because she's so smart, she alienates people because she's kind of a know-it-all. So you see that we're taking those attributes and just twisting them a little bit to make her more psychologically subtle, okay? Being a know-it-all means that she has trouble making friends. Having trouble making friends means that she spends a lot of time by herself. Okay, so maybe that leads to her being on a boat by herself, right? Her grandfather taught her how to sail. She goes out on the boat. She thinks, I don't need anybody. And then we have this, so you see that there are constantly causal relationships between the things a character says and does and thinks and is and what happens out here in the world. So I hope this kind of helps a little bit. You will get better at character building the more you build characters, okay? It really is a process that takes time until you get a whole cast of characters in your mind that are going to populate your story. So I hope that helps, and thanks.